Emma was driving through the scorched Arizona desert to film a documentary on drought. But then, her headlights caught a bobcat kitten collapsed on the roadside, barely breathing. So she broke every rule of being an observer, gave it a sip of water, and unknowingly bound her life to its fragile heartbeat. Where are you watching from? If this moment moved you, like and subscribe for more true stories of courage, heartbreak, and hope. Arizona stretched out before Emma Collins like a canvas left too long in the sun. Faded, cracked, but still breathtaking in its own way. She drove her battered Subaru past miles of empty highway, heat waves rippling above the blacktop, the sky as big as the ocean but mercilessly dry. Road signs were sun-bleached and bent. Each mile took her further from the world she knew, deeper into a land she hoped to capture on film, a place gripped by the worst drought in generations. Emma had filmed in wild places before. She'd filmed elephant seals in the biting winds of Patagonia, wolves in Yellowstone snow, but this was different. She was here for a documentary on the drought, how climate change was pushing every living thing, plants, animals, people, to their breaking point. She had notebooks, permits, cameras packed with silica gel, but nothing prepared her for the quiet when she finally stepped out of the car. The land wasn't silent exactly. The wind scratched at dry grass. Somewhere, cicadas buzzed like broken power lines. Far off, a raven's call echoed, but there was a sense of everything holding its breath, waiting. At the tiny, sun-baked town where she'd arranged to meet her local guide, Emma found Marcus Reed waiting beside his ancient red pickup, arms folded, a straw hat shading his weathered face. He looked right at home in the heat, his dark braids tied back, boots covered in dust. "You must be Emma," he said, voice low but warm. "You ready for this?" She smiled, brushing sweaty bangs from her brow. "As ready as I'll ever be. The air feels like it's been squeezed dry." Marcus grunted, eyes scanning the horizon. "That's one way to put it. Come on, let's get out before the sun turns mean." He tossed her bag into the truck, and together they set off toward the high country, bumping along dirt roads, passing through lands dotted with cacti, old fence posts, and the occasional glimpse of a coyote melting into the brush. As they drove, Marcus pointed out landmarks, an abandoned trading post here, a dry arroyo there. He spoke of his Navajo heritage, the stories his grandmother told about how the land remembers every kindness and every slight. Emma listened, recording snippets on her phone, her curiosity blooming alongside her anxiety. "There's a spring near the old ridge," Marcus said. "Used to be full all year, not anymore. My people, we've always watched the signs, the way the animals move, the taste of the wind. But these days, even the old signs get mixed up. Some folks say it's the land punishing us. Others say it's just time running out." Emma let the words sink in, watching as the world outside the window shimmered with heat. She spotted a saguaro skeleton, a once mighty cactus, now just a hollow rib cage, and felt a pang of unease. Would her film do any good? Could a story really change anything for a place this wounded? They made their first stop near a patch of mesquite and brittlebrush, the mountains looming purple on the horizon. Emma hauled out her camera and tried to focus on the patterns of light and shadow, the colors of dust and sky. It was beautiful, but there was an edge to it, beauty sharpened by hardship. Marcus crouched nearby, tracing a line in the dirt with a stick. People forget. Out here, everything's connected. The water, the animals, the old ways. Take one piece out, it all starts to fall apart. Emma nodded, snapping a photo of a lone hawk circling high above. The silence pressed in again, thicker this time, heavy with the things unsaid. For a while they just watched the land breathe, if it could be said to breathe at all. The wind picked up grit and scattered it across their boots. Far off, heat lightning flickered, promising rain that never came. As the afternoon wore on, Emma interviewed Marcus, asking about the changes he'd seen, the traditions of his people, how they were coping. He spoke of sacred springs that had dried up, of animals growing desperate, of elders who remembered wetter days. Yet there was a resilience in his voice, a refusal to give in even as the world seemed to shrink with every passing summer. They shared a meal in the shade of the truck, cold water from metal bottles, sandwiches limp but welcome. Emma's mind kept drifting to the purpose of her visit. She wanted to do more than just record suffering. She wanted to show the world that this place and people like Marcus were more than victims. They were survivors, caretakers, warriors in a silent war against drought. As sunset approached, the landscape seemed to catch fire with color. Orange, gold, and deep red spilled across the sky, painting the desert with defiance. Emma felt her spirits lift, if only for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, a single story could matter after all. They packed up their gear, dust swirling around them, and headed back toward the highway. But fate, as always, waited just around the bend, ready to turn calm into chaos and every plan into a test of heart. And that's when they saw it. On the side of the lonely road, almost invisible in the shadows, something small moved. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about courage, hope, and what it means to fight for a fragile life. The last blaze of sunset still shimmered on the horizon as Emma and Marcus continued down the lonely Arizona road, the truck's headlights catching bursts of dust in the fading light. The world felt emptier with every mile, a kingdom of shadows and hush, the land stripped bare by a drought that had no end in sight. Emma stared out her window, fighting the fatigue that comes after a long beneath a punishing sky. Her mind replayed Marcus's words about old signs, about the balance of nature, about how the land could teach if one was willing to listen. She was ready to wrap up, camera stowed, thoughts already drifting to editing and voiceovers, when the world seemed to stop. A shape emerged at the shoulder of the road, so slight it might have been a shadow. At first Emma thought it was a rock, or maybe a patch of fur caught by a coyote, but as they slowed to a crawl, the headlights swept across a trembling form, a kitten, barely more than a bundle of bones and dust, golden eyes glassy with exhaustion. Marcus pulled over, engine idling as they both stared. The kitten didn't flinch. Its ears, too big for its head, twitched at the rumble, but it was too weak to move. Emma felt an ache in her chest, an instinctive urge to run to it. But she remembered the rules of the wild. Nature had its reasons, and interfering could carry consequences neither science nor spirit could predict. Still, she stepped out, heat rising off the asphalt. The air was heavy, electric, as if the desert itself was watching. Emma crouched a few feet away, watching the kitten's shallow breaths, its sides fluttering with each one. Flecks of dust clung to its whiskers. Up close, the pattern on its fur was unmistakable. A bobcat kitten, not more than a few weeks old, separated from its mother and litter, left at the mercy of the elements. For a long moment, Emma wrestled with reason and compassion. Every training manual said to let wild creatures be, to let nature take its course. But this was not nature. It was a world undone by human hands, a landscape scarred by choices far beyond this kitten's reach. The line between observer and participant blurred. Marcus approached quietly, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. He spoke only once. "If you pick it up, you carry its fate." It was not a warning, not quite permission, but an acknowledgement of what Emma already felt deep inside. She hesitated, looking into those golden eyes, clouded but ancient in their sorrow. Her mind raced through possibilities: disease, injury, starvation, dehydration. None of them offered hope. The kitten's tongue flicked out, searching the ground for moisture, but the earth was cruel and dry. Emma reached into her bag for a canteen, unscrewing the cap with trembling hands. She poured a trickle of water into her palm and held it close. At first, the kitten did not move. Then, as if summoned by the memory of life, it stretched its neck and lapped weakly at the water. The drops barely made a difference, but in that moment, a line was crossed. Responsibility settled on Emma's shoulders like a mantle. She knew this act, simple, human, foolish, or brave, had changed the course of the night. There was no going back. She wrapped the kitten in her jacket, its tiny body lighter than fear, and hurried back to the truck. Marcus watched her, silent, neither judging nor encouraging. But there was a gravity in his presence, a sense that something old and sacred had just been disturbed. The road back to town blurred by in a haze of headlights and silent prayers. The kitten's breathing was ragged, its body limp but alive. Emma kept her hands steady, whispering reassurances into the dark, half for the animal, half for herself. Every bump in the road seemed an insult to its fragile body. Marcus drove with a steady hand, eyes fixed on the way ahead. The night pressed in around them, thick with uncertainty and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the hardest battles begin with a choice as small as a sip of water. At last, the lights of town appeared, dim, scattered, but a promise of help. They pulled up to the Wildlife Rescue Center, a squat building on the edge of civilization, its porch light flickering like a star in the gloom. Emma cradled the kitten, its heartbeat fluttering against her palm, and hurried inside. Inside, the world shifted again. The air was cool, tinged with antiseptic and hope. A rescue worker hurried over, and in a flurry of questions and quick movements, the kitten was lifted from Emma's arms and placed in the care of those who knew how to fight for wild lives. Relief washed over Emma, mingling with exhaustion and worry. She had done something irrevocable, maybe right, maybe wrong, but she had acted. Now the fate of the Bobcat Kitten rested in hands steadier than her own. As she stood in the sterile light, watching the rescue staff work, Emma wondered what the dawn would bring. Out there, the desert waited, unchanging. But inside these walls, for one small life, everything had changed. Inside the rescue center, time seemed to lose its grip. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows along sterile floors. The air smelled of bleach, animal musk, and the bitter tang of antiseptic. Emma hovered by the entrance, jacket crumpled in her hands, adrenaline still roaring through her veins. Marcus waited near the door, arms crossed, a silent pillar in the swirling chaos. A wildlife technician, badge reading Jordan, whisked the kitten away, calling for Dr. Harris, the veterinarian whose reputation had reached even Emma's circles. In the flurry of movement, Emma felt herself dissolve into the background, a witness swept along by the momentum of hope and protocol. From the small observation window, Emma watched as Dr. Harris and his team worked over the Bobcat Kitten. They laid it gently on a heated pad, clipped an oxygen mask over its muzzle, checked its tiny heartbeat with a stethoscope barely larger than a coin. Emma tried to study every gesture, every instrument, willing expertise to replace the helplessness gnawing at her chest. A nurse swabbed the kitten's ear and drew a drop of blood, frowning at the thinness, the way the skin barely clung to bone. Saline was injected with a trembling needle. All the while the kitten barely moved. Only the faint quiver of its breath marked the boundary between life and loss. Emma pressed her hand to the glass, willing strength across the invisible barrier. She remembered, almost with shame, the moments earlier in the day when her worries revolved around footage and deadlines. Now everything narrowed to this one fragile life. At first, there was relief. Dr. Harris emerged, his face weary but calm. "You found it just in time," he said quietly, mostly to Marcus, but loud enough for Emma to hear. "Extreme dehydration. If you hadn't stopped." The rest was unspoken, the sentence left unfinished, as if words themselves might jinx what little hope the kitten had. They administered fluids, warmed the kitten with blankets, monitored its pulse and temperature. For the first time in hours, Emma let herself exhale. She slumped into a battered plastic chair in the waiting room, letting her head fall into her hands. She didn't notice the tears slipping through her fingers until Marcus quietly placed a hand on her shoulder. No words were spoken. The gesture was enough. Outside, night pressed against the windows, filled with the secrets and struggles of all wild things fighting for survival. But hope, as Emma would soon learn, is a fleeting guest in a house of crisis. An hour passed, then another. Emma tried to keep busy, scribbling notes, reviewing camera footage, researching bobcat survival rates on her phone. The numbers were grim. Orphaned kittens rarely survived in the wild, even with help. She tried not to imagine what would happen if the kitten slipped away, tried not to blame herself for crossing the line between observer and participant. Suddenly, the center erupted with urgency. Alarms sounded from the back room. Nurses rushed past, murmuring in clipped voices. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as Dr. Harris reappeared, his expression grave. The kitten had crashed, its tiny body, ravaged by hours of exposure and dehydration, was spiraling into shock. The staff sprang into action, pumping more fluids, stimulating its frail heart, working by instinct and training to wrest life back from the brink. Emma stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The scene beyond the glass blurred, all sharp edges and frantic hands. She saw the kitten's sides heaving, saw its mouth open in a silent gasp, saw Dr. Harris's lips moving in a stream of calm, professional commands. The minutes dragged, each second a lifetime. Emma gripped her notebook so tightly it bent in her hands. A wave of helplessness crashed over her. This was the reality of saving wild things, the agony of trying and failing, the burden of caring when nature had already decided. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Sometimes, what we want to save is already beyond our reach." But Emma refused to let go, her mind racing for any way to tip the odds. At last, after what felt like hours, the chaos eased. The team slowed, tension fading into exhaustion. The kitten's breathing steadied, but its body was limp, its fate still uncertain. Dr. Harris met Emma's eyes through the glass, and she saw hope there, but also caution, the guarded optimism of someone who'd seen too many miracles slip away. Emma was allowed into the room for a brief moment. She knelt beside the incubator, watching the kitten's flanks rise and fall, its fur still matted but warmer now, less ghostly. She whispered a silent promise. Not for the camera, not for her film, but for this life, right here, right now. If there was a chance, she would fight for it. Back in the waiting room, Emma stared at the ceiling, heart raw. Marcus waited beside her, saying little. Outside, the night wore on, a world indifferent to suffering and hope alike. As dawn threatened the edges of the sky, Emma realized her journey had changed shape. She was no longer just a storyteller. She had become part of the story. The real battle, she knew now, was only beginning. Dawn crept into the rescue center with slow reluctance, spilling pale light through dusty windows. Emma sat curled in the same plastic chair, arms wrapped around her knees, mind trapped in a churn of exhaustion and hope. The world outside was waking up, birds calling weakly, delivery trucks rumbling past on the highway. But inside, time moved differently. Here, every breath of the Bobcat Kitten measured out the pace of the day. She'd barely slept. Each time her eyelids drifted shut, she jolted awake, convinced the next moment would bring news she couldn't bear to hear. She replayed everything. The first sight of the kitten, its desperate lapping at water, the fight for its life on the cold metal table. Logic told her she had done all she could. Emotion insisted she should do more. Across the lobby, Marcus watched her with the calm patience of someone used to waiting out storms. He'd spent most of the night sitting cross-legged against the wall, silent but present. His presence a quiet anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Occasionally he closed his eyes and murmured something under his breath. Prayers or old stories, Emma couldn't tell. As the light grew, Dr. Harris emerged from the back, eyes shadowed but determined. He spoke quietly, giving updates, but Emma barely heard the words. Still critical, fighting, needs rest. Fragments drifted through her mind, swirling with her own doubts. Marcus finally rose and crossed to her side. "You did what you could," he said softly. "Sometimes that's all anyone can do." There was a heaviness in his tone, a wisdom born of watching too many wild things slip away. Emma wanted to believe him, to let reason win. But the image of the kitten's limp body and its faint, desperate cries haunted her, pushing her toward the edge of hope and despair. In the quiet that followed, Emma remembered her training, objectivity, detachment, letting nature take its course. Yet now those rules felt hollow. Had she made things worse? Was saving the kitten just a way to ease her own conscience, offering comfort in a world that didn't owe anyone mercy? She thought of the camera equipment waiting in her car, the documentary she'd come to film. The story she was supposed to tell was about drought and survival on a grand scale, vast landscapes, powerful forces, the fate of entire ecosystems. But here she was, caught up in the smallest story possible. One orphaned bobcat kitten, its life so fragile it barely registered against the backdrop of disaster. Yet something inside her refused to let go. She watched the rescue staff move through their morning routines, feeding, cleaning, checking on animals that had been luckier, or perhaps stronger, than her tiny charge. She saw the quiet competence in their hands, the unspoken agreement that every life mattered, no matter how slim the odds. As the morning dragged on, Emma found herself standing at the glass, watching the kitten. Its breathing was shallower now, but it still fought. The nurses checked its vitals, turned it gently to avoid sores, stroked its head with the back of a gloved finger. Emma pressed her hand to the glass, willing strength across the divot. A wave of helplessness washed over her. She'd always prided herself on being tough, practical, the kind of person who could face harsh realities. But now she questioned everything. If the kitten died, had she only prolonged its suffering? If it lived, would it ever be wild again? Was compassion just another way of interfering with the world's harsh but honest balance? Marcus appeared beside her, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. He spoke quietly, sharing a story from his childhood about a hawk they'd tried to save after a storm. Sometimes, kindness is enough, even if the world says otherwise. His words floated in the hush, neither a comfort nor a judgment, simply a truth he'd learned from hard experience. Emma leaned into the uncertainty. Maybe there were no perfect choices, just imperfect people, doing what they could in a world that often made no sense. The kitten's fate would not be decided by science alone, or by the force of her will, but by something older and wilder than either. A nurse called for her, gesturing for Emma to wash her hands and enter the treatment room. She knelt beside the incubator, careful not to startle the kitten, and whispered a few words. Not promises, just presence. She let her fingers rest near its paw, feeling the faint warmth, the tremor of a heart still fighting. For a long time she stayed there, saying nothing, letting the silence fill with meaning. Around her, the world outside spun on. People drove to work. The sun climbed the sky, and the desert wind carried secrets only the land could keep. Emma understood, at last, that some battles couldn't be won or lost, only fought with all the heart one had. Saving the kitten might be a false hope, or it might be the start of something extraordinary. Either way, she would not walk away. When she finally stepped out into the sun, she felt lighter, not because she had answers, but because she'd chosen to care, knowing the price and embracing it anyway. And somewhere behind her, a fragile life continued to cling to hope, teaching her that sometimes the bravest thing was simply to believe. The afternoon sun climbed higher, indifferent to the drama unfolding inside the rescue center. Emma lingered in the corridors, her nerves stretched thin, each hour passing marked only by the quiet hum of machines and the gentle shuffle of caretakers moving from room to room. She clung to routine, jotting observations into her notebook, adjusting her camera settings, trying to anchor herself in the familiar work of a documentarian. But her thoughts circled endlessly around the Bobcat Kitten, trapped between hope and the growing shadow of loss. From the observation window, Emma watched as the tiny creature lay motionless in its incubator, connected to a web of IV lines and sensors. Its eyes were closed, breathing shallow and irregular. The staff moved with deliberate calm, masking their own doubts behind years of practice. Emma saw the fatigue in their faces, the subtle tightness in Dr. Harris's jaw. They all knew the odds. Outside, life continued. Birds flitted between thorny bushes. The wind carried clouds of dust down the empty streets. Emma found herself longing for escape, for the simple clarity of nature beyond these walls. But she could not bring herself to leave. The rescue center had become a world unto itself, where time moved at the pace of a fragile heartbeat. Night fell. The quiet deepened, punctuated only by the occasional beep of a monitor. Emma dozed fitfully in her chair, waking to the sharp jolt of memory, fear slicing through her dreams. She replayed the decision to intervene, the first sip of water, the helpless ride to the center. Doubt pressed heavy against her chest. Had she only extended the kitten's suffering? Had she done this for the animal or for herself? Just after midnight, the emergency erupted. Emma jerked awake to a flurry of movement. Red lights flashed on the monitors. A nurse called for Dr. Harris. The kitten, so frail and stubborn, was convulsing, its small body arching in a silent, desperate plea. The staff moved fast, oxygen, injections, urgent words exchanged in the hush. Emma pressed herself against the window, powerless, breath caught in her throat. She watched as Dr. Harris worked with steady hands, refusing to surrender to panic. The kitten's spasms slowed, its breaths grew shallower, and for a moment time itself seemed to hold its breath. Emma's vision blurred with tears, a raw ache tearing through her composure. This was the moment she had feared, when the limits of compassion and medicine were laid bare, when the reality of nature's indifference could not be denied. Marcus appeared at her side, silent and calm, a grounding presence in the chaos. He waited until the crisis passed, then gently guided Emma to a quiet corner. She felt the weight of failure settling around her, as if the desert itself had pressed its ancient hand upon her shoulders. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The stillness stretched, filled only by the distant, muffled sounds of the rescue staff tending to other wounded souls. Emma's mind raced with regret, anger, and grief, every emotion colliding inside her. Finally, Marcus spoke, his words slow and measured, steeped in the wisdom of generations. He told her of the old teachings, how sometimes, to truly help a wild creature, one had to let go, to trust that nature could teach what medicine could not. If it is to live, nature must teach it. The words landed like stones in her heart. She wanted to rage against them, to reject the idea that letting go could ever be kindness. But deep down, Emma recognized the truth in his voice. She remembered stories of wolves returning to the wild, eagles finding their wings again only when left to their own strength. She saw, for the first time, that her love for the kitten had become a kind of prison, her fear of loss holding both of them captive in a place neither belonged. The night dragged on. Emma sat with Marcus, staring into the darkness, wrestling with her helplessness. She listened to the faint sounds of the kitten in the treatment room, occasional mewling cries, punctuated by long silences. Each sound carved a deeper mark in her memory. At dawn, Dr. Harris came to find her. His face was gentle, but tired, bearing the burdens of too many battles fought at the edge of hope. The kitten had survived the night, but barely. Its body was depleted, its wild instincts dormant. Medicine alone would not be enough. It needed something the rescue center could not provide, a reason to fight, a chance to rediscover the wildness it had nearly lost. As Emma stepped outside into the cold, pink light of dawn, she felt hollowed out but strangely resolved. She knew the next choice would not be easy. She could not hold the kitten here forever, suspended between life and death. If it was to have any chance, she would have to let nature reclaim its role. Standing beside Marcus, Emma gazed out over the waking desert. The sun painted the land gold, shadows slipping away. She made a silent promise to the kitten and to herself. She would not let her fear of failure become its cage. However this story ended, she would honor its struggle by giving it one more chance, to learn, to heal, to remember what it was to be wild. Emma stood in the uncertain light of dawn, feeling the desert's vastness pressing in on all sides. The events of the night still clung to her like the scent of antiseptic and loss. Yet, as the sun crested the horizon, painting the land with fresh gold, a new resolve began to stir in her. She remembered Marcus's words about letting nature teach and Dr. Harris's quiet admission that medicine had reached its limit. The kitten's survival would demand something more, a return to the world it was born to belong in, a place where instinct might awaken what science could not. After consulting with Dr. Harris and Marcus, Emma proposed a desperate plan. Relocate the Bobcat Kitten to a semi-wild sanctuary near Sedona, one of the last areas where underground springs still flowed, providing a thin lifeline for wildlife battered by drought. It was a gamble, but no less so than the slow suffocation of hope within the rescue center's walls. The decision weighed heavy, but Emma felt a strange clarity. Keeping the kitten here meant endless waiting and artificial care. Setting it free, while risky, offered a chance for its wild nature to rise, even if it meant letting go of control. Emma prepared as best she could, gathering supplies, a small animal carrier, blankets, fluids, her camera, and a quiet hope she was doing the right thing. The road to Sedona was long and unforgiving, winding through canyons and high desert plateaus. Marcus drove, guiding the truck along gravel paths lined with ancient junipers and towering red rocks. The air shimmered with heat, even in the early morning. Emma kept the carrier close, checking the kitten often. Its eyes flickered open now and then, still clouded but more alert, as if some inner sense recognized the changing world outside. As the truck rumbled through the landscape, Emma felt the tension mounting. She knew the dangers: coyotes and hawks, venomous snakes, the relentless sun. Even the spring itself, once a promise of life, could be little more than a muddy trickle in this year of suffering. But each bump and jolt seemed to breathe a faint spark into the kitten's battered body, stirring something primal that the sterile center could never reach. The journey was grueling. At one point, a dust devil spun across the road, forcing Marcus to slow to a crawl. Emma squinted into the haze, recalling Navajo stories Marcus had told her about the land's living spirits, about how every struggle carried a lesson. She clung to these stories, letting them anchor her heart against the mounting uncertainty. After hours of travel, they arrived at a sheltered glade, a patch of green clinging to the red earth, shaded by sycamores and tangled brush. The sound of water, thin but persistent, filtered through the silence, a reminder that hope sometimes endures in the smallest places. Emma set the carrier down near the spring, heart hammering in her chest. The kitten sniffed the air, ears twitching, its body trembling with exhaustion and confusion. This was the turning point, the last chance for a fragile life to remember what it was to be wild. She opened the carrier, holding her breath as the kitten crawled out. Its steps were unsteady, legs splaying beneath its slight weight. Emma ached to help, to steady it, but forced herself to stay back. This was the moment for instinct, not intervention. Marcus stood a short distance away, watching in respectful silence. Emma caught his eye and saw in his expression both worry and a quiet hope. The air felt charged, as if the entire desert were holding its breath for this single, fragile creature. The kitten staggered forward, nose low to the ground, body trembling with each movement. It paused at the edge of the spring, paws sinking into the cool mud. For a long moment, nothing happened. Emma's heart beat painfully, torn between despair and desperate hope. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow flitting across the rocks. Emma tensed, ready to intervene, but the bird continued on, uninterested in such a meager prize. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of water and wildflowers, and the kitten's nose twitched. With a sudden, almost miraculous effort, the kitten pressed its muzzle to the ground, Digging awkwardly at the soil, water seeped up through the cracks, darkening the earth. The kitten drank, lips trembling, body hunched against the effort. Emma let out a long, shuddering breath, tears pricking her eyes. It was drinking, truly drinking, not from a syringe or a bottle, but from the earth itself. The moment was raw, charged with more meaning than any footage or photograph could capture. Emma watched in awe as the kitten's tail flicked and its eyes grew brighter with each swallow. It was weak, still a shadow of what it might become, but for the first time since they'd found it, Emma saw not a victim, but a survivor. The sun crept higher, casting long shadows through the trees. Emma and Marcus remained silent, unwilling to break the spell. The kitten finished its drink and sat back on its haunches, gaze flickering between its rescuers and the wild world beyond. There was fear in its posture, but also curiosity, a sign, however faint, that instinct had begun to stir. Emma snapped a single photo, more for herself than any audience. She knew the next hours would be critical. The kitten might still fail. Predators and heat, hunger and confusion all waited just beyond the glade. But in this moment, she allowed herself hope. For now, the story was not yet over. As they prepared to leave, Emma looked back one last time. The kitten, small but stubborn, watched them go, the spring behind it glistening in the early light. It was not a guarantee, not even a promise, but it was a chance. A wild, beautiful gamble against the relentless odds of the desert. For a long time, Emma stood at the edge of the clearing, every sense stretched taut as a wire. The wilds of Sedona, with their towering red rock and sun-baked stone, seemed to hold their breath along with her, as if all the old spirits Marcus spoke of were watching this fragile creature attempt the impossible. The bobcat kitten, barely more than skin and bones, crouched near the spring, its fur matted with dust, trembling with exhaustion and the unfamiliarity of freedom. Emma's hands shook as she packed up the last of the supplies. Each gesture felt final, each movement a small farewell. The urge to scoop the kitten back into safety gnawed at her. How easy it would be to return to the truck, to controlled air and measured feedings, to a world where hope felt tangible and outcomes could be charted by medicine. But something deeper, almost ancestral, whispered that the moment had come to step back and trust the wild itself. Marcus lingered a few paces behind, his shadow long in the morning light. He said nothing, understanding perhaps better than anyone that the land did not give up its lessons easily. There was no guarantee in this gamble, no mercy written into the stones or the sun or the veins of spring water running under the earth. There was only the rhythm of survival, older than kindness, indifferent to hope. The kitten inched forward, dragging itself through clumps of wild grass and the mud at the spring's edge. Its movements were clumsy, the legs trembling with effort, but there was a persistence to its struggle. Emma watched, heart pounding, as it tried to crouch and pounce on a dragonfly, darting near the water's surface. The attempt ended in a tangle of paws and a splash that sent the insect spinning away. But the failure didn't stop the kitten. It sat up again, blinking in the sunlight, then pressed its nose to the water, drinking in deep, greedy gulps. Every instinct in Emma warred with itself. She wanted to help. Her fingers twitched at every wobble, every hint of weakness. But she held herself rooted to the spot, forcing her heart to listen to the land. This was not a rescue that could be completed by hands or words. The bobcat would have to choose for itself, to drink, to explore, to fight for life with all that remained in its tiny body. The midday heat began to creep in. shimmering over the rocks. Overhead, a hawk traced lazy circles, searching for movement below. The danger was real and constant. Emma's eyes scanned the tree line. Nerves stretched raw, but she did not intervene. Even Marcus, ever the steady presence, watched in silence. The kitten, thirst momentarily slaked, started to wander further from the spring, curiosity drawing it into the shadows beneath the sycamore trees. It tested its paws on fallen leaves, startled at the crunch beneath its weight, then attempted a wobbly leap onto a sun-warmed stone. For a moment, it balanced there, the world reduced to the patch of sunlight and the slow, determined breath of a creature relearning its place. A lizard darted past, and the kitten tried once more to pounce. This time, the effort brought it down awkwardly, landing with a soft thump. Its breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, and it seemed to crumple, eyes glassy with exhaustion. Emma felt her own breath catch. Was this the end? Had she only delayed the inevitable, given hope where none belonged? The air hung thick with silence. Emma stared, willing the kitten to move, to try again, to defy the laws of nature just this once. Then, with a tiny, determined yowl, the kitten clawed at the earth, pushing itself upright. It staggered back to the spring, almost collapsing, but managed to drink again. Each effort left it weaker, but still alive. Emma's heart ached with the effort of letting go. She thought of all the lives she'd witnessed through her lens, creatures who'd survived storms, fires, droughts, and those who hadn't. This was the wild truth of the world. Life was never guaranteed, only given as a daily challenge, a test renewed with each sunrise. Hours passed. The kitten grew bolder, venturing further into the patch of shade, returning to the water, retreating again. Emma and Marcus kept their vigil from afar, resisting the urge to intervene even as the sun burned overhead and predators circled on the edge of sight. They became part of the landscape, watchers, not saviors, holding their breath for every wobbling step, every hesitant bite of grass, every small victory against the weight of fate. As afternoon faded into gold, the test reached its peak. The kitten, nearly spent, tried once more to catch a cricket at the spring's edge. It missed, collapsing in a heap of fur and dust. For a moment, it lay utterly still, and Emma thought her heart would break from the waiting. But then, impossibly, the kitten lifted its head and drank once more. Emma understood, in that moment, what true release meant. Not surrender, not defeat, but the courage to let a wild thing meet its own destiny. The sun slid lower, the air cooled, and the shadows stretched. The wild threshold had been crossed, not just for the kitten, but for Emma as well. As twilight gathered, Emma and Marcus quietly packed up their things, leaving behind a patch of glade where life and instinct had met in honest struggle. The kitten remained by the spring, curled in the shelter of roots, hidden from the eyes of the world, but never forgotten. Emma walked away with tears in her eyes, not of grief, but of a fierce, humble respect for the wild's eternal, uncertain promise. The glade wore the hush of twilight, a gentle breeze threading between ancient sycamores and the rugged red stones of Sedona's wild heart. Emma lingered at the edge of the clearing, her boots rooted in soft moss and brittle twigs, her eyes locked on the patch of earth where the bobcat kitten lay curled. The world felt suspended, a fragile stillness broken only by the faintest burble of water seeping up from the spring and the delicate rustle of the wind. Emma's heart moved with every rise and fall of the kitten's breath. Each moment stretched impossibly long, filled with dread and a hope so fierce it hurt. She thought about all that had led them here, the rescue center's flickering lights, the desperate ride through burning canyons, the trembling form huddled in her jacket. Now the last light was fading, the land cooling, shadows deepening. The wild was no longer a story. It was the only world that mattered. Marcus remained nearby, his presence quiet, blending with the dusk. He offered no words of comfort, understanding that this moment needed no language. His gaze followed the kitten with the same respect he gave the ancient rocks and spirits of his home, a silent faith that nature sometimes offers second chances if one is humble enough to wait. For a while the kitten did not move. Its body shivered now and then, the struggle of the day etched in every trembling muscle. Emma's eyes stung with exhaustion. She tried to memorize the scene, the kitten's fragile shape, the half-moon rising between branches, the sweet scent of damp earth. Here, in this lost corner of the world, hope felt both impossibly small and blindingly vast. As night deepened, something shifted. The kitten stirred, nose twitching, ears flicking at distant sounds. A coyote's cry, the soft slap of water on stone. Slowly, it stretched, dragging itself forward on uncertain paws. Emma tensed, afraid it would collapse again. But a spark of determination shone in its eyes. The spring's muddy edge beckoned. The kitten sniffed at the earth, digging clumsily, and suddenly, with a patience born from desperation, began to paw at the soft, wet soil. Emma hardly dared to breathe. The world shrank to the sound of those small claws scratching through dirt. The ground, nurtured by the hidden veins of water below, grew dark and glistening where the kitten worked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if the desert itself relented, a thin trickle of water welled up from the broken earth, clear and cold. The kitten drank with wild abandon, muzzle soaked, whiskers quivering. Emma felt something inside her break and mend all at once. She watched as the kitten's frail body was filled with new strength, as its eyes brightened, the haunted glaze giving way to a gleam of wildness and will. Each gulp seemed to knit its spirit back together, a baptism not just of survival, but of belonging. Marcus let out a long breath, a smile ghosting across his face. In that small act, no miracle but a miracle nonetheless, Emma saw everything she had hoped for and feared she would never witness. The kitten's instincts, battered but not lost, had saved it when nothing else could. All the medicine, all the care, all the desperate effort had led to this, the simple, ancient act of finding water, of choosing life. Night pressed closer, stars kindling above the canyon rim. The kitten lingered by the spring, licking its fur clean, eyes darting to every movement in the brush. Emma and Marcus kept their distance, honoring the wildness that was never truly theirs to save. The forest around them seemed to exhale. Crickets began their song. An owl called from a high branch. The earth itself, parched and scarred, seemed a little less unforgiving. Emma felt tears on her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the wild gratitude of witnessing a second chance taken, against every rule and every odd. As the first true darkness swept over the glade, Emma packed her camera, barely noticing. The story she came to tell had changed. It was no longer about drought and loss, but about the defiant flicker of hope in a broken world. A hope that could not be commanded or scripted, only witnessed. She and Marcus walked quietly back toward the truck, pausing for a final look. The Bobcat Kitten, stronger now, melted into the shadows near the spring, invisible but unforgettable. Emma knew its future was still uncertain. Predators, storms, hunger, all waited. But for now, the wild had welcomed one of its own back home. As they drove away beneath a sky blazing with stars, Emma realized she had learned something the camera could never capture: that the truest stories are not about saving, but about letting go and trusting in the fierce, persistent magic of life. In the days after leaving the Bobcat Kitten at the spring, Emma felt the world shift beneath her feet. The drive back from Sedona was silent, the red rocks fading into the night behind her and Marcus as they rumbled through darkness toward the town's scattered lights. There was relief, a trembling, exhausted relief that they had given the kitten its last and truest chance, but also a hollow ache where certainty used to live. Even the landscape seemed changed, the desert wind colder, the moon above more distant. Emma returned to her motel room, the walls closing in after so many hours spent beneath the open sky. Her equipment sat untouched. The storyboards and shot lists she had so carefully planned now seemed trivial, the planned documentary's structure as dry and brittle as the land itself. The heart of her story had shifted, moving out of her hands and into the wilds, where no lens could follow. She tried to work. She reviewed the shaky footage of the rescue, the frantic moments in the wildlife center, the kitten's first uncertain steps near the spring. But her mind wandered. She wondered about the kitten every hour, if it had found shelter, if its instincts were enough, if it remembered the taste of water and the sound of her voice. She caught herself listening for wild calls outside her window, hoping for a sign, but the night held only silence. The time Emma lost at the rescue center and during the drive to Sedona cost her dearly. She missed a scheduled shoot with a local rancher whose story would have anchored her film. By the time she tried to reschedule, the window was gone. Other documentary crews moved in, eager to capture the spectacle of drought and despair. Her network, while sympathetic, expressed concern over deadlines. Funding grew precarious. She faced the reality that her project might end before it could truly begin. But even as doors closed, Emma felt something inside her open. She spent her days wandering the edges of town, camera slung over her shoulder, searching not for dramatic shots, but for small moments of connection. An old woman watering a single cactus, a child playing in the dust, a coyote trotting through empty lots at dawn. She filmed quietly, letting life unfold without interference. In those simple stories, she found an honesty and a hope that felt more powerful than anything she could have scripted. Marcus, too, faced consequences. Word spread quickly through his community about what they had done. Some elders saw his actions as a violation, a disturbance of the wild balance, a meddling with spirits that ought to be left alone. They remembered old lessons, that not all lives can or should be saved. Marcus listened respectfully, never arguing, carrying the weight of tradition in silence. Others, especially the younger generation, felt inspired. They saw courage in Marcus's willingness to help, a bridge between old ways and new. They began organizing small cleanups along the dry riverbeds, setting up makeshift water stations for wildlife. The debate was never settled, old stories rarely are, but a conversation began, the first in years, about the role of compassion in a world changed too quickly for anyone's comfort. Emma, for her part, remained an outsider, welcomed in some circles and regarded with suspicion in others. She accepted this quietly, spending evenings with Marcus's family, listening to stories around a campfire, learning the songs and prayers that had shaped this land long before she'd arrived. The kindness she found there healed something raw inside her, a reminder that sometimes the true reward of compassion is not the outcome, but the connection it forges. Occasionally, she returned to the glade near Sedona, moving carefully and keeping her distance, hoping for a glimpse of the Bobcat Kitten. The land was always changing, a new trail of paw prints here, a patch of fur snagged on a branch there, the faintest imprint of wildlife gone unseen. Once, just after dawn, she spotted a flash of golden fur moving through the brush, strong and quick, vanishing before she could focus her lens. Whether it was her kitten or another wild soul, Emma didn't know. It hardly mattered. What mattered was that hope lived on, hidden and persistent as water beneath desert stone. As summer wore on, the drought deepened. Wildfires threatened the hills, and water restrictions tightened. Emma's film became something new, a patchwork of small victories, quiet losses, and the unseen threads of kindness that connected them all. She interviewed those who stayed, who fought for every fragile thing, who loved the land fiercely, despite its hardships. The documentary was not the story she'd planned, but it was the one she needed to tell. In the stillness of her motel room, Emma reflected on the journey. She had given up control, sacrificed ambition and certainty, and faced the scorn of those who saw her choice as naive. Yet the price she paid was repaid in ways she could not have imagined. In the flicker of life revived, in friendships forged over firelight, in the knowledge that a single act of compassion can ripple through a community, changing hearts in small, unseen ways. The kitten's fate remained a mystery, its life woven back into the wild tapestry of Sedona. Emma understood, finally, that the greatest stories are never finished. They echo through every act of care, every moment of courage, every wild, trembling heartbeat that dares to choose life. Months slipped by, and the relentless Arizona drought stretched on. Emma stayed longer than she'd planned, finding purpose in the slow rhythm of the desert, letting her film grow in directions she hadn't foreseen. She spent her days in the field and her nights reviewing footage, stitching together fragments of hope and hardship into a story that was as much about endurance as survival. By autumn, the land had changed. Rains came in a single wild storm, turning gullies into rivers for one night, before the thirst of the earth swallowed the water whole. The cacti bloomed despite everything, stubborn flowers bursting from spined arms. Coyotes grew bold, venturing close to houses in search of scraps. The community, battered but unbroken, pressed on, each person finding their own way to live with uncertainty, to make peace with the wildness that shaped their days. Emma grew quieter, her presence in town as steady as the desert sun. She visited the rescue center often, sometimes just to listen to stories from the staff, other times to help with releases and cleanups. She was no longer the outsider with a camera. She was a witness, a recorder of small miracles, a friend to the land and its people. Her film took shape in ways that surprised her. It was no longer just about drought or climate change. It was about the choices people make in the face of loss, about what it means to help even when the outcome is uncertain. She edited late into the night, weaving in shots of the Bobcat Kitten's journey, the hands that had tried to save it, the land that had welcomed it back to the wild. The story was messy, imperfect, filled with setbacks and moments of beauty, just like the desert itself. Sometimes, late at night, Emma thought of the kitten. She imagined it stalking through moonlit brush, golden eyes sharp and bright, wildness humming in its blood. She wondered if it had survived, if it remembered the kindness of human hands, or if the memory of rescue had faded into instinct. The question haunted her, but it was a gentle ache, softened by gratitude. Not every story had to end with answers. Some were meant to linger, echoing into the unknown. On a cool evening near the end of her stay, Emma drove out to Sedona one last time. The sun was setting, splashing the sky with molten orange and violet. She hiked the familiar trail to the glade by the spring, heart beating faster with every step. The land felt the same, rough, wild, alive with secrets. But she felt changed, grounded by what she'd witnessed and what she'd let go. She waited, camera hanging loosely by her side, breath slow and steady. As dusk settled, she saw movement near the water's edge. For a moment, her heart stilled. Out of the shadows stepped a bobcat, no longer a kitten, but not yet fully grown, sleek, muscled, its coat shining in the last light. It moved with the cautious confidence of something that belonged. The animal paused, ears flicking, eyes sweeping the glade. For a moment, those golden eyes met Emma's across the clearing. She did not lift her camera. She stood perfectly still, honoring the wildness that had always been beyond her reach. The bobcat sniffed the air, then melted into the undergrowth, as silent and mysterious as it had appeared. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from awe. In that moment, she understood the story she'd come to tell. It was not about saving, or even surviving. It was about the courage to care, the humility to let go, and the wild, stubborn hope that grows in the cracks of a broken world. When she returned to town, Emma finished her film with a new kind of clarity. The final scenes showed the land after rain, flowers blooming through the dust, and the fleeting shadow of a bobcat at the edge of frame. She recorded a quiet narration, her voice steady but thick with feeling. Sometimes, the smallest act can change an entire fate. In a world where loss is certain and answers are rare, kindness endures. It lingers, rippling through lives, wild and unseen. The documentary was released quietly, shared online and screened at local gatherings. It did not win awards or go viral, but it found an audience. People sent stories of their own rescues, their own moments of courage and doubt. A few even traveled to Arizona, hoping to glimpse the wild heart that had captured Emma's soul. Marcus and his community watched the film together, some with pride, others with reservation. But for all their differences, they agreed on one thing. The land needed people willing to care, willing to risk being changed by their compassion. Emma moved on, drawn to new stories, but she carried Sedona with her always. The red earth, the silver light, and the memory of a bobcat that had taught her the meaning of letting go. As the credits faded, Emma's final words echoed. A gentle call to those who listened. If this story touched your heart, hit like to spread kindness. And if you want to keep walking alongside moments of healing between people and the wild, don't forget to subscribe. Have you ever faced a choice, save a life or walk away to protect yourself? Share your story in the comments. You never know who you might inspire. In the end, the wildness remained, not tamed, not solved, but honored. And somewhere, in the vast quiet of Arizona, a bobcat slipped through the shadows, a survivor not because of Emma, but because of its own unbreakable will, and the brief, gentle touch of kindness that helped it find its way home.